This podcast is part of the Blueberry Network, where listeners and podcasters come together. Find out more at blueberrywithnoease.com.
The Eat Sleep Right podcast is brought to you by generous grant from the Built on Dreams Media Network, with additional funding by the Sims Media Foundation, and from the generosity of listeners like you.
Stand by, please. Rolling on six. On six.
Welcome to episode 120 of the Eat Sleep Right podcast. I'm your host, Adam Scull. The Eat Sleep Right podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download at audibletrial.com/Eat Sleep Right. Over 100,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, iPad, Kindle, or MP3 player. The podcast is available on eatsleepright.net as well as the iTunes store, where you can also subscribe to it. My goal is to find out how writers become authors, how they got where they are, how they do what they do, and how they go from a blank sheet of paper to a finished manuscript. eatsleepright.net is also made possible by the generous cooperation of Writers World Facebook group. Join the Writers World Facebook group. Learn how to become a better writer. If you enjoy the Eat Sleep Right podcast and you've had your own adventures in writing, I'd like to hear from you. Tell me about yourself and your story, and I may get back to you and have you as a guest on the Eat Sleep Right podcast. If you have any questions or comments, anything at all, I'd like to hear from you. The email address is comments@eatsleepright.net. Andrea Baker, welcome to the Eat Sleep Right podcast.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you for having me.
Your first book in a series, Worlds Apart, Leah, Book 1, you qualify as paranormal fantasy. What attracted you to this particular genre?
I've always been fascinated by the area of fantasy that I describe as edge of reality. So it exists in the real world as we know it, but it's just over the edge of that. You could perceive that it actually exists alongside the world that we live in. It's the unknown that's on the edge of reality. I've always been fascinated by that area of paranormal, effectively, that's right on the edge of the real world, that could, with a little bit of imagination, feel as though it is reality, and that's what draws me to it.
Paranormal is a very active and responsive area to readers these days. When you wrote your book, did you have this in mind? Or did the popularity of the genre have no effect on you when you decided to write this story?
It very much was driven by the story that I'd had running around in my head for quite a while. And it was the aspects of the story that drew me to it, to write it.
How did you come up with the idea for the story?
It was an idea that occurred to me in dreams. Any female listeners that have had children will recognise you get very vivid dreams in the early stages of pregnancy, and the ideas were coming in these dreams. But it was like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. They wouldn't fall together for me properly. Idea just kept spinning around in my mind for quite a few years, on and off. It was compounded by the fact that for many years I'd stopped myself making notes and coming up with story ideas, dismissing it as something I should have grown out of.
How do you keep track of all your ideas? Do you keep a notebook with you?
I try to keep a notebook with me, which is actually a discipline that a friend of mine talked me into. I would historically scribble them down on a scrap piece of paper, try and remember them, which is always fatal. With the advent of modern technology, with smartphones, I would record voice notes.
Ah, now that's an interesting idea. I've never had anybody tell me that before. They usually just write them down. You just use a simple recording program to speak your thoughts.
Yes.
Brilliant, as they say in the UK. That is fantastic. I mean, you think I'm kidding, but I'm not. I'm like, wow.
It's vital. I do a lot of driving in my job to and from clients, and ideas will pop into my head from music, from different songs on the radio. That's become a much more fluid way of just keeping an idea live, really.
In the first line of your synopsis, you write, "Nightmares are just dreams, aren't they?" I often think about that, for as we wake up, we feel like we've actually been there. Is that one of the driving reasons that made you pick this genre?
Yes, that dreamlike state between sleep and wake that you've just so adequately described is part of the overall story, my love of paranormal, because it is that edge of reality.
What led to your interest in writing?
That's actually a really difficult question to ask. I'm sure many authors would say the same thing. I imagined stories long before I could actually physically write. My favourite books as a child I could read before. My mum would sit me next to her on the couch and read me stories. And I could read those stories, I could read those words with her. And I did those stories before I could even write them down. I think I was about 12 or 13 before I actually physically started to try and write my own.
Tell me about your joy of writing.
It's a freedom. It's very difficult to put to words because it is a form of escapism, but it's a complete and utter freedom where you can be yourself. You don't have to think about whether somebody will like it or somebody will hate it. It's an idea in your imagination that you can just let run, and it's probably the best form of freedom, pure freedom, that I've ever encountered.
What did you find the most difficult, the beginning, middle, or the end?
For me, the end, because it is part of a much longer story, so it was knowing where to end that first book on what was sufficient to give the reader closure on what had happened to start with, but still want them to be interested in what happens next.
Are you an outliner or a seat-of-the-pants writer?
Oh, definitely seat of the pants, definitely seat of the pants. I've tried with books 2 and 3 to outline them. I know where the story is going, but actually the discipline of outlining them has stunted the creativity a little. So I've gone back to the seat of the pants, writing it as I imagine it and as I visualise it, and then going back to make sure it follows the plot.
Because, Andrea, many authors have said to me they have index cards, or with Scrivener they use the electronic index cards. They plot out everything before they really even write it out.
My style of writing I actually describe as being very visual, because in my mind I can almost literally see it.
Tell me more about how you take a visual idea and turn it into words.
The advantage I have with this book, Leah, is that the locations are actually all real. It is an area less than 3 miles from where I live, and it's an area I know very, very well. As the story unfolds, it can be a piece of music, it can be a story I'm reading with my daughter. Something will trigger an idea. And when I get into writing mode, I envisage the location, the part of the story, and then it does literally unfold as though it is a film. And quite often it'll go off in tangents, so I'll have to follow a tangent to see if that works, or come back to the fork and go off in the other tangent. But it is very, very visual. It was actually a vision of the castle where the majority of the story is based, in a lightning storm that pulled all those jigsaw pieces together. That visual that made it all click for me.
How much of you is in the book?
There's a lot of me and a lot of my knowledge of the area and my love of paranormal in the book. There are snippets of it in the main character, snippets of me in terms of how she reacts to certain situations, but she's very much a person in her own right, and very much, in my mind, a real person that lives, breathes and acts completely differently in some instances to I would.
What do you do to remain invisible when you're writing?
Consciously, when I'm editing, I try to take out expressions in dialogue that I know are mine, that I know is my pattern of speech. Subconsciously, I have deliberately given Leah, the main character, some very different personality traits to my own to try and keep it independent of me. I thought I needed to do that because it's written in the first person. It's first person rather than third person narrative. If I didn't make that distinction, people would just think it was me writing about me.
Is it more difficult to write in first compared to third person?
It depends on what you're trying to write. I write in both. For me, it very much depends on the story I'm writing, what fits the story, the whole plot better, whether the reader needs to be within the main character or needs to be watching it as though, again, it were a film.
Tell me more about your book, Worlds Apart.
The book is about a fairly young girl, she's 19, called Leah. She lost her mother when she was 14, so 5 years prior to the setting of the book. And her world changed, her world turned upside down. She's just about to start university here in Britain. Because of losing her mother so young, her father actually uproots them both and moves his job, moves their house and everything else to a new location so that they can stay together. As the story unfolds, you will find we see that everything isn't quite as it seems. Leah has been having nightmares quite a while now, almost since her mother died. And those nightmares, rather than becoming better with the move and leaving the past behind them, are actually getting worse. And they start to transcend into her waking life. She wakes up with bruises and marks on her body from what has happened in the night. Coupled with that, her father's behaviour deteriorates. There is a very limited but a brief passage where he attacks her after she's been out and he doesn't know where she is. She's involved in a very nasty accident, ends up in hospital. There is, of course, a romantic element within the story. Everything changes and she has to face some real demons in order to progress and find out the truth.
I often ask authors, how do they write what they know without writing about themselves? In this case, did you have a lot of these nightmares? Or is this just your imagination in high gear?
The experiences, none of them are mine. I've always been very open-minded when it comes to other than reality, and I've always had the benefit of very realistic visual dreams, the blessing of a good memory that remembers them for more than a few minutes.
Complete this sentence. The writer's inner journey is...
a passage of discovery. It's a journey where you have, I would describe it as a seed. You have a seed of an idea, and you play with it, you plant it, you feed it, you water it, play with light and dark so that it grows. You don't know what it is, you don't know what that seed is going to grow into until you put all those things together and nurture it until it grows.
Are you self-published or are you traditionally published?
I was traditionally published. I had a traditional publishing contract. The traditional publishing house went bankrupt. They closed their doors. The book is now in a publishing company called Rosewall Publishing, which I am a part owner of.
How did you feel when you were first offered the contract?
It's indescribable. I was over the moon. I shook from head to toe. My husband was with me, and he said you could physically see me shaking. I'd got the contract. I was so excited, so overwhelmed.
From such a high point, and then they closed due to bankruptcy. A crushing blow.
A very crushing blow, absolutely devastating. And for several months, I thought, well, that's it. I'm never going. The whole series is going to die. It's not going to be out there. It was through conversations with friends and other professionals, other writing colleagues, that I came to the conclusion with the person that Rosewall Publishing is through. Actually, it's not just about my book. My series needs to be out there, but other people are in the same situation. There's a lot of smaller companies going under and a lot of not so honest companies out there.
Welcome to the world of boutique publishing. Yet you managed to get through the closing of your publishing company, and you've continued on your course of being a published author. Another round of sheer determination for you. Going up the down staircase.
Yes, definitely. As I said earlier, for many years, I stopped myself writing ideas down because I thought I'd outgrown it. I knew I should have outgrown it. The release and the freedom that writing gave me when I went back to it, it was a determination to not lose that. It was quite a dark period when the publishing house was closing and I thought it had all come to an end, but it was the realisation of the difference it's made to me that my family had noticed, my husband had noticed in going back to writing. And allowing myself to do that, I couldn't let that die. The publishing house grows as we would like it to, and we can give other people that opportunity, then that's fantastic. But it will be done carefully and slowly because I don't want to be responsible for doing to somebody else what happened to me.
But you did it. You got through it. That's sheer determination. That's fantastic. You never gave up.
Thank you.
Advice to other writers?
A few prongs to the advice I would give to any writer, any author. Don't give up. There is a long journey between that first idea and the book being out in the marketplace, but it's a worthwhile journey, so don't give up. But should you be offered a traditional contract, read it not with the thrill of somebody wants to publish me, which we all do and is perfectly natural. Read it with a little bit of cynicism, or get somebody that you trust to read it for you who hasn't got the emotion involved in it, because there are a lot of companies out there that when you go into the detail, I know authors who've had no control over covers, no control over editing, And when the book has hit the marketplace, it is so different to their baby, their vision, that it's nothing to do with them. They feel detached from it, as though it isn't their book.
Where can we find out more about you and your book on the internet?
You can look at my author website, which is www.andreabakerauthor.com. You can contact me through my Twitter account, which is @rosewall15, or via my author Facebook page, which is listed under Andrea Baker Author. I'm always interested in hearing from people.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to impart about your book?
I would pick up on one of your earlier questions and just say that with Twilight and the Sookie Stackhouse book, just the general fascination with the vampire world that people have. People often think that paranormal is just vampires. There are a lot more creatures within the paranormal genre. I can honestly say you will not have seen my creatures and my world anywhere else.
Andrea Baker, author of the series Worlds Apart, Leah, Book 1, thank you so much for being with me today on the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast.
Thank you, Adam. It's been a pleasure.
If you're looking for a community that can offer you tools, support, and advice to start your own adventures in writing, then prepare to have the cauldron of your imagination stirred. I started the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast so more people can understand what it's like to be a writer and to get more eyes on your books. My goal is to help you achieve the success you so richly deserve. I salute your success in writing.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast, located at eatsleepwrite.net. Please send any questions, comments or suggestions to comments@eatsleepwrite.net. Please consider a donation to support the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast. Donations can be sent to our PayPal address at donations@eatsleepwrite.net. Once in a lifetime, the theme music for the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast, courtesy of Stephen Paul, all rights reserved, used by permission. Please join us again for the next edition of the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast.